Hey, welcome to The Explainer. You know, in a democracy, soldiers are supposed to have the same rights as any other citizen. But for a long time in India, their path to justice, it was basically a closed loop. So today, we're going to break down the special court that was built to fix all that, the Armed Forces Tribunal.
So, let's put you in their shoes for a second. Imagine you've given your entire life to serving the nation. But what happens when things go wrong? Maybe it's a dispute over your pension, or you feel you were totally unfairly passed over for a promotion. Or worse, you've been convicted by a military court and you know it's wrong. For decades, the answer to where do I go now? Well, it was a pretty grim one.
And you don't have to take my word for it. Back in 1982, India's Supreme Court came up with this perfect phrase to describe the whole mess. They called it an appeal from Caesar to Caesar's wife. Think about that. It means you're literally asking for justice from the same people, the same authority that you're challenging in the first place. There was no outside perspective, no independent voice at all.
All right, so let's dig into that old system, the whole Caesar's wife problem.
So, before 2007, everything, and I mean everything, was handled internally. You had the Army Act, the Navy Act, the Air Force Act, and any complaint, any appeal, it just went up the military's own chain of command. It was a completely sealed-off system, a closed loop, with absolutely no way for an outside court to take a look.
And this is where that famous Prithipal Singh Bedi case comes in. The Supreme Court pointed to what it called a glaring lacuna, which is just a fancy legal term for a massive, gaping hole in the system. Right? Because with no independent place to appeal, the basic idea of natural justice just wasn't there. For the average service member, it meant they had pretty much nowhere to turn if they felt they'd been wrong.
Okay, so after decades of the courts pushing for change, something finally gave. A historic reform, a brand new court just for soldiers.
And that reform came in 2007 when Parliament passed the Armed Forces Tribunal Act, creating what we know is the AFT. Its mission sounds simple, but it was huge. Create a truly independent body that could deliver fast, fair justice, and finally break open that old closed loop. So you might be asking, how does the AFT actually guarantee it's fair? Well, it's got this really smart hybrid setup. It's like the best of both worlds. On one side of the bench, you have a judicial member. That's a retired high court judge who brings all the legal and constitutional know-how. And on the other side, you have an administrative member, a high-ranking retired military officer who gets the nuts and bolts of service life. This mix means the decisions aren't just legally correct, they're also grounded in the real world of the military. So the AFT basically has two major jobs, giving soldiers two clear paths to get justice. First up is what's called original jurisdiction. That just means it's the first stop for all those service matters we talked about. Disputes over pay, promotions, pensions, that kind of thing. But second, and this was the real game changer, it has appellate jurisdiction. This is huge. It means the AFT can act like a proper appeals court for anyone convicted in a court-martial. They can look at everything, the evidence, the procedure, the sentence, the whole shebang.
Let me give you a really concrete example of just how much of a difference the AFT has made. Let's talk about disability pensions. For years, the rule was just brutal. If a soldier developed a disability, the entire burden of proof was on them. They had to prove, without a doubt, that their service directly caused it. Imagine trying to do that. It was an incredibly high bar, and for many, just impossible to meet.
But then came landmark judgments, like the Dharmbir Singh case, which the AFT started applying, and it completely flipped the script. Now, the rule is this. If a soldier joins the service in good health and later develops a disability, it is presumed to be related to their service. The burden of proof is now on the military. They have to come up with strong evidence to prove it's not service-related. You can imagine this one single change has been a lifeline for thousands of people.
So no doubt about it, the AFT was a massive step in the right direction. But here's where the story gets complicated. In a really ironic twist, the AFT's very own success has created a whole new set of problems. It's almost become a victim of its own success.
Let's start with the good news, because there is some. The AFT is an absolute workhorse. I mean, since it started, it's cleared over 74,000 cases. That's a disposal rate of about 76%, which is pretty darn impressive. So by any metric you want to use, the people there are working incredibly hard.
But, and this is the big but, here's the paradox.
Even with them clearing cases so quickly, the line to get justice is actually getting longer. The number of pending cases has just kept climbing, year after year, and it's now over 26,000. So, what in the world is going on?
Well, it turns out it's a kind of vicious cycle, and there are 3 big reasons why. First, you've got crippling manpower shortages. Benches in different parts of the country just can't function because the posts are empty. Second, the government itself keeps appealing the AFT's decisions, especially when the tribunal rules in favor of a soldier on things like pensions. And that leads to the biggest irony of all. The more successful the AFT is at giving soldiers what they're due, the more the government appeals, which just creates more litigation and clogs up the entire system.
And all of this leads us to the final battleground, which is really a high-stakes constitutional fight over the AFT's power and, ultimately, who gets the final word.
So check out this legal roller coaster. Back in 2015, the Supreme Court basically said high courts couldn't review AFT orders. The idea was to make the AFT the final authority, but what it actually did was create this judicial vacuum. Suddenly, there was almost no way to appeal a decision, and that was the law for nearly a decade. Then, in 2023, in a huge reversal, the Supreme Court changed its mind in the landmark Purushottam Das case. It gave the high courts their oversight power back, saying that judicial review is a basic, fundamental part of the Constitution that you just can't take away.
So where does that leave us? Look, there's no question the Armed Forces Tribunal was a game changer. It absolutely ended that old, unfair era of Caesar appealing to Caesar's wife. But when you look at the crippling backlogs and the constant appeals from the government, you have to ask a tough question. Has the AFT really fixed military justice? Or has it just moved the battle to a new front, creating a new kind of war of attrition for the very soldiers it was designed to protect? That is the question the entire system is still trying to figure out. Thanks for joining us.